Hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is Jim Callback. I'm the head of customer success at Mural, and we're pleased that you can join us today. These days, we're expected to work both fast and flexible. We need to react to changes and be ready to pivot at any time. And understanding why we need to change and how comes from creative activities like user research and design thinking. But sometimes working fast can make it hard to find times for this type of creative work. And that's where design sprints come in. These are concentrated bursts of team collaboration, and usually it entails team getting together for several days or for a week exclusively to focus on design challenges. Now, design sprints can be intense, but they're usually very productive. But what happens if your team is remote? Can you still do design sprints? Well, the answer is clearly yes, and we're lucky today to be joined by Lila von Alvensleben. She works for a design firm called Hanno, which is completely remote. And I first came across Lila's work from her research that she did into remote design thinking. And you can read about her thesis online. But Lila also has a ton of practical experience running remote design sprints with clients like Uber and Lenovo. Before we get started, I just wanted to encourage you to join us on Twitter. That's at Mural. Follow us on Twitter at Mural. And please use the hashtag #RemoteSprint. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the questions pane in the webinar software. That's the Q&A area in the webinar software. I'll be back at the end of the webinar to take some of the questions from you, and hopefully we'll get to most or all of them. But for now, I'd like to hand it over to Lila. So Lila, please take it away.
Hi, I'm Lila von Alvensleben, and I'm a designer at Hanno. I'm currently based in London, but I do work with a remote team. You can find me on Twitter at Lila von A, and Hanno is at We Are Hanno. And yeah, feel free to use the hashtag #RemoteSprint. So in today's webinar, I'm going to cover these topics. I'll start with why remote design sprints are important, and then I'll introduce you to the company I work for and how we do design sprints remotely. And finally, I'll end with some tips for remote work and hopefully answer some of your questions. So I suppose many of you are already familiar with design sprints. And if you're not, I'll just briefly describe it as a process for prototyping and testing any product, which usually lasts around 5 days, although sometimes they can last more. So yeah, why is it important to know how to do them remotely? So I believe there are 3 main reasons for this. Well, first of all, we're seeing more and more companies are investing in design. So if you look at Apple, we see that Jony Ive has used design to shape Apple's vision into what it is today. IBM is building the largest design team in the world with 1,000 people around the globe. And we see a lot of startups in Silicon Valley and beyond who rely on designers to come up with solutions to their business problems, just like everyone else. And if we look at the numbers, we see that remote work is constantly increasing. If you look at the survey by After College, it found that 68% of college students and recent graduates are interested in working remotely because they believe that employers who invest in a flexible and casual work environment will have a positive impact on their work. And another recent survey by Gallup shows that telecommuting in the US workforce has climbed up to 37%. In 2015, and that's actually 4 times greater than a decade ago. So it was 9% in 1995. And the third reason for considering remote design sprints is that design sprints can be more profitable too. And many people think that sprints will compromise the quality of your work, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. So if they're well planned beforehand and if teams are familiar with the process, sprints can help designers stay more focused since they're only solving one problem at a time rather than multitasking between several projects. And they're also more efficient use of everyone's time and money, so both for design studios or design agencies and their clients because they can achieve results faster. So our team at Hanno uses design sprints to help businesses become more digital. And we do this by helping them with UX design, design research, visual design, web development, and design thinking. So overall, design thinking is an underlying mindset across everything we do, and we always put the user first in our design process. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Hanno. Some of you may have already heard about us, but if you haven't, I'll just tell you that we're not a traditional agency for many reasons. So these are the reasons why we're quite different. We are remote, we are self-managed, so we don't have any hierarchies. We're very transparent, both within ourselves and our clients. We work in an agile way, and we work very lean. But remote is a huge part of who we are as a company, and that's how most people know us. They know us as the remote design team. And we consider the internet as our home, not only because it's what we work with, but also because it's where we come together to collaborate. So yeah, remote work comes with a lot of challenges, especially with team culture and communication. But over the years, Hanno has found solutions for most of these challenges. And most importantly, I just want to point out that the processes we use are just as important as our online tools when it comes to working across different time zones. So this is the team behind Hanno. We're currently 8 designers from 10 different nationalities in different parts of the world, as you can see here. And we are remote because we think it's really important for everyone to live the lifestyle that they think works best for them. So if living somewhere is going to make you a better person and a happier individual, we think that that's going to be very beneficial for the company too, because you'll bring that energy and that well-being into the team that you're working with. And we're also generally passionate about doing good. And we see ourselves as change makers who are out there to use design to build a better world. And last year in 2015, we became a social business. So that means that we're committed to invest our profits into working with socially motivated organizations if we think that they'll make a positive impact on people or on the environment. But our projects aren't always for social purposes. So in the past, we've worked with Uber, But and Lenovo. So we've worked with a bunch of people in the corporate world, and we worked a lot with people in the startup scene. And we continue to do so, even though we're trying to work more and more for social good as well. So now I'll get into the most relevant part of why you're here today, how we run design sprints remotely. Since we're remote, we use a bunch of online, often cloud-based platforms to collaborate. And these are the main tools we use on a day-to-day basis. You'll notice that we don't use email almost at all. And that's because we found it much more efficient to use Asana and Slack for decision-making and for instant communication. So Slack is what we use to communicate anything instantly. It's where we check in the morning. It's where we share also fun stuff and anything related to projects. And we also use it to work on our projects. So we will onboard our clients on Slack too, so that they can participate in our conversations during sprints. We use Asana internally for managing all our tasks and our projects. It's all about project management. We use video conference tools. There's a bunch of them out there because unfortunately none of them are 100% reliable. So we tend to switch between different video conference tools. We use Google Drive to store all our files, and it's great because it's in the cloud, so it's easy to share with clients and our teammates. And yes, we use Mural as part of our creative process during our sprints. Mural really helps us to visualize all our work and put sites in one space so we can easily have a quick overview of what we're doing with the team. And we also use it with our clients so that they can build on our ideas and they can give us feedback on whatever we're working on. I'll show you some more examples of how we use Mural later on. But first, I just want to start talking to you about how we actually begin a sprint from the beginning. So the first step we'll do is allocate the time to work on a sprint. We use a tool called Harvest Forecast. It's another online tool, and it basically shows us who's available, when, and what other projects we have going on at the same time. And once we've allocated a week for a sprint, so yeah, sprint is 5 days, as I mentioned earlier, we're ready to create the team. So we create the team based on the skills that we need, and we've realized that having only one team working on one project at a time is much more effective than having several people split their attention between multiple projects. So for example, with Uber, we had 3 people on a team. That's usually the amount of people we have on a team anyway. And we had a mixture of skills based on the goals that we wanted to achieve during the sprint. And we might allocate one sprint after the other. So although it will start out with 5 days, if we do 3 sprints back to back, it will last 3 weeks. In this case, it just lasted 2 weeks actually. And now this is how a typical project will unfold. So a project might be 1 sprint or it might be several sprints, as I just mentioned earlier. The initial phase is what we call the strategy phase. So this is where we try to get a real understanding of the business goals and try to find a solution to reach those goals that the client is trying to reach. We'll start out with an understand sprint, and this will usually include workshops and interviews and a lot of research. It could be user research, it could be research about other competitors, or research just about the context that the client is working in. They might even provide us with research that they've done, so we'll take that over and then use the insights that we uncover during that understanding part. Then we'll have an ideation part, which is more about rapidly developing ideas that fulfill certain opportunities that we've identified earlier. We'll start also building prototypes, and this can last 1 or 2 weeks or even more sometimes, so several sprints. And then we have a validation phase, and this is where we'll be testing the prototypes and gathering all the user insights from the testing. And once we complete these first 3 phases, we're ready to polish a prototype or an MVP that we've created, a minimum viable product, right? And then we'll enter what we call the execution phase. And this phase is all about building and launching a shippable product based on the feedback that we gathered earlier from the user testing. So we'll continue building, measuring, and learning as we go through this. And throughout the process, we're basically teaching our clients how to think and work like a startup, because we're working in a very lean way. And many of our clients, especially corporates, maybe are not used to this kind of way of working. But even startups, it's, for many, it's the first startup they do. So they're also learning how to think in a more lean way, making quick changes to their product and finding the best market fit. And once they do that, the team can take ownership of this process that we've shared with them, as well as all the online tools that we've used. So this is how, the actual project over the course of many sprints will look like. And as I mentioned earlier, Mural is one of the main tools that we use for remote collaboration, and it would be great to be in the same room, and probably much easier sometimes to have ideas bounce off of each other quickly and use real Post-its. But we're remote we've chosen to be remote, and it does work well for us. And Mural is a great solution. It's a great alternative for that physical space that we can't have. So to show you how we use Mural, I'm going to present you a case study. This is for a client we did called Ava. This was a project that we did last year. Ava is a startup company based in San Francisco, and they have made a mobile app that helps deaf and hard of hearing people follow conversations in real time with others. So it uses a kind of speech recognition technology that captions speech into text immediately. And it's an amazing mobile app that they're doing, and we did a 1-week sprint with them to improve their onboarding process. So I'll show you how we did that. And to show you this, actually, the first thing we did was we did research to understand their goals in the company. But I also want to show you a part of the research that we did on an actual Mural board. So this is a live Mural board. As you can see in the top right-hand corner, we gathered a lot of onboarding processes. So we gathered a lot of screenshots, which we dropped into this Mural. You can see there's other people using it and adding comments right now as we're looking at it. And we were just comparing the kind of different ways that other apps and other companies had created their onboarding process. And once we compared those and commented on them, we started working on journey maps. So we had a bunch of personas that the client had given to us beforehand. So this was a first-time Fred at work, for example, and he was, this was his onboarding process, and we were trying to identify all the feelings that he would be going through and all the pain points that he would have during his onboarding process. And as you can see overall, there's about 3 journey maps here. There's a bunch of notes and sticky notes and screenshots and text and arrows, but it was just a great way for us to visualize everything as a team in one place, and also allowed us to share this with the client and get approval from them or get other feedback. And we continued using, this is just one of the many murals that we used throughout the project. So after doing the research phase, we also started ideating on the new onboarding process and what it would look like. And we created our first prototype, which we wanted to test with users. So while we were doing the research, we actually asked our clients to find users in the deaf and hard of hearing community who would want to test our prototype, and they did find several users. Here we have a screenshot of a Skype conversation that we were having. So on the top right-hand corner, there are these are students in a deaf school, and we have the client on the left who is talking about the prototype, and on the bottom we have 2 people from Hanno. And we started doing our prototypes, very, very basic ones in Google Slides, because it was easy to collaborate on all together remotely, and it also made it easy for us to share these prototypes with the testers that we wanted to test it, with the users that we wanted to test it with. And while we were prototyping, the class could also start giving feedback immediately. So we were sharing the Google Slides with them, and as soon as they would point out something that they wanted to change, we were there to change it instantly. And it was a great experience to see that kind of instant interaction with these online tools. We also did more in-depth interviews, so one-on-one interviews with people where we could continue testing the different versions of prototypes that we had. And this is probably one of the most challenging parts of working remotely, is finding users that you can ask questions to for the research part, but also to test things with. But you can always find a solution around this, like we did this time. Our client had a community of users that they could already contact. And by the end of this week that we worked with them, we had a total of 10 prototypes, which we tested with about 15 different users. Some were very quick tests, like we did with the classroom, and some were really in-depth interviews. And our final deliverable was also delivered on Mural. This is actually what we handed in to the client, along with all the research that we had done and all the prototypes that we created. We gave them a fully developed onboarding journey on Mural that we came up after a week of research, ideating, prototyping, and validating from real users. So now that I've shared what a sprint can look like, I'm just going to give you a few tips and learnings that we gathered along the way. So something to keep in mind before the sprint is that there's a lot of things to prepare, especially as a remote team, and especially if you're in different time zones. So don't underestimate the amount of pre-sprint preparation that goes into this. So one of the first things that you would do, or that we would do, is to create a new client project online. We don't use email, as I mentioned earlier, but we do use Basecamp to communicate with the client, and this allows all the teams to have easy access to different conversation threads. So we'll open a new client project online in all our tools. So we'll do that on Basecamp, we'll do that on Asana, so internally for us to do project management, and on Google Drive to create new online files, which we'll be sharing in future. And then also have a pre-sprint call with the client just to talk about the goals and the expectations and the concerns that they might have about this. And once you've done that, actually, maybe even before you do that, select the team members that will be needed on the sprint based on the skills that you need to reach the goals. So sometimes the goals are spoken, usually the goals, you know them before you start the sprint anyway, but sometimes those goals will change during the pre-sprint call or just before. So you can easily select better team members based on what comes up during the pre-sprint call, and identify time zones so that you can define a time for the daily stand-up calls. As part of our process, we have daily stand-up calls in a sprint where you discuss with the client what you've achieved so far, any problems that you're encountering, and the things that you're going to be doing the next day. These are all things that we do during stand-up calls, and they tend to last around 15 minutes. So not too long. They should be very brief, just to give them an overview of what's going on. And then if there's big issues, they can identify them and then maybe help us later on during the day to solve them. Also, this is a good opportunity before the sprint to ask client to find users for user testing later on. Do not leave this till the day before, because as it has happened sometimes, unfortunately to us, it can be very stressful to suddenly realize that some users have backed out or they're not available. And also because of the different time zones, this is especially important to make sure that people have time to test your prototypes in their very busy schedules. And lastly, do test your internet connection and try to find reliable alternatives as a backup. So if you're not sure that your internet, or even if you think that your internet will last well throughout the sprint, just have an alternative nearby anyway, in case the power goes out or something like that. It has happened to me before where the power went out for 5 hours, and I did have to find a quick alternative to that. And finally, these are some tips on how to communicate and collaborate even better with your team. So a lot of people, again, they think that working remotely isn't possible, that it's super challenging. They might have even given a try and maybe failed at it. So what Hanno did was they practiced and they practiced and they practiced, and they had to learn from their mistakes. And eventually it does get better. There are some ups and downs, like always, but it's not impossible. So first of all, I would suggest that it's better to over-communicate rather than to assume that others have understood what you're trying to say when you're communicating online. So with all these tools between Slack and video conference tools and so forth, we think we've mentioned something in a conversation. We think that the other people have understood, but there's something about being physically apart from other people. Sometimes communication gets lost somewhere along the way, and it's better to repeat yourself, especially if you're doubting whether they've understood what you're trying to say. And also keep in mind that people cannot read your body language or your facial expressions necessarily. So rather than nodding or shaking your head, remember to say yes and no, just to vocalize what you're thinking, especially if you're working, for example, on Mural. Do explain what you're doing at the same time as you're doing it, because people will not necessarily be looking at your face on Skype at the same time. Also, try to work from a quiet environment to make sure that people in your team can hear you properly. Make sure to have the right equipment, to have a good microphone and good earphones. Also, some people are very self-conscious when they work in a co-working space because they're very aware that other people can hear them. So just try what works best for you. If you'd rather work from home or from a Skype booth in a co-working space, maybe that works best. Make sure you have a daily schedule that clearly identifies what you're going to achieve every single day. Otherwise, it's really easy to waste time on deciding what you're going to do next. And give yourself some time limits as well for some activities, because the time pressure will help you to come up with some very creative ideas. And yeah, split your team up to work individually, together, and face-to-face. There's another myth about remote work where we often think that if you're remote, then you can never meet anyone face-to-face. Now, that doesn't have to be the case. If you have another teammate who happens to be in the same city as you, then by all means, do go and work side by side with them. Or if you have to meet a client and it's easy to meet that client, you can still meet them face to face and then go back to working online with the rest of the team. And also because these voice calls are quite draining, it's good to get away and work individually a bit and then come back to the team. And then a very useful last tip for you all is to bookmark all the important links so you can easily find them. They can save a lot of time and unnecessary stress when you have to suddenly go on a call and find a link to share with a client or with your teammates. Just have those ready somewhere on your toolbar. And yeah, that's how we do remote design sprints at Hanno, all the time basically. And I hope this webinar has been insightful for you all. We are currently setting up some workshops to help teams learn how to work remotely. So if you're interested in this, do get in touch with us. There are email addresses at the bottom, Lila@Hanno.co or Jim@Mural.co, or you can contact us on Twitter. And thank you all for listening. I think Jim might have some Q&A for me that I'll try to reply to.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lila. That was fascinating to see and hear about those stories. We have a ton of questions, so I'm just going to jump into some of those and we could have a conversation here.
Great.
Let's see. There was a question around Google Docs, for instance. And the question was around the difference between, let's see, this is from Logan, and he says, can you elaborate on how having all of the information in one document in a mural is better than having multiple documents, like Google Docs, for instance? And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, Lila.
Yeah, well, if it depends, first of all, what you're documenting. So I'm assuming that if it's something like in-depth research or an interview or something like that, it's better to use Google Docs. And then, of course, there's Google Spreadsheets and Google Slides and all that. So, like, for example, we use Google Slides for prototyping because it allowed us to switch easily from one slide to the next and have that impression that we're changing from one screen to the next. And Google Docs would be great when we have to use more lengthy kind of information. It really depends on the kind of information you have. But when we want to, for example, visualize things, brainstorm, for example, Google Docs can be quite limiting because of the space it's in. It's basically forcing you to put all the content one after the other in a very sequential order. And then people can, sure, they can comment on it, but you can't just pair things together as easily, for example, as you could on a mural, where suddenly you can make a cluster of ideas and be like, oh, this is, otherwise you'd have to be scrolling through pages and pages of Google Docs and try to copy and paste things to cluster them as text and images. And then you'd have to reformat the pictures, and it would just basically be a waste of time. So we've realized that sometimes you can also create so many Google Docs that you get lost in them. And with Mural, you can have just one big overview over everything and then zoom in into the part that is really the most relevant for what you're trying to achieve at that moment. I hope that answers the question.
No, that's a great answer. One that we here at Mural like to hear as well too. So that's fantastic. I had another question around design sprints in general. Of course, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lila, but the term was more or less coined or brought into popularity by Google and Google Ventures. I just chatted over a link where you can see some of the information that Google has put out there around design sprints. But the question comes from Ahmed. And he says, how do design sprints that a team like Google Ventures do compare to your sprint style? It looks a bit more iterative in terms of activities that start and end before the other activities could start. So I was just wondering, Lila, if you had any thoughts about the Google design sprint methods and how yours relates to those.
Well, from as far as I'm concerned, when Hanno also came up with its way of doing sprints, I think it got itself inspired from people like Google Ventures, right, who were doing these sprints. And I, for example, I haven't read like the latest book that Google Ventures has come out with. I'd love to, but I think we're quite similar in that sense. I guess to be very honest with you, I haven't like looked back at how Google Ventures does their sprints anytime recently, so I don't have it fresh in my mind at the moment. But we also do 5-day sprints, so that's pretty much the same. We also iterate on things all the time. We maybe what Google Sprints does, they talk more about, they use different terms, for example, like diverge and converge. I mean, we don't use those terms, but we're basically doing the same things. And they prototype by maybe the 3rd and 4th day, we do the same thing. So I think in a way we're actually quite similar. Maybe what Hanno didn't do before that Google Ventures was doing was using design thinking. So in the past, I know that when Hanno first started out, they weren't necessarily, they were maybe using elements of design thinking, but they weren't calling it design thinking. And since I joined just pretty much at the same time I joined, that kind of changed. And we definitely use more design thinking exercises and put the user much more into focus than maybe previously. But I would say, I think we're very similar in the way we do it, actually. But, again, like I said, I don't have the exact Google Venture sprint imprinted in my mind. So yeah, I hope
that's fine. No, that's great answer. And, personally, from my standpoint, it's more about the principle than the process. So, not looking at design sprints as a cookbook and, you have to do these steps in a certain order, but what are you trying to get done? And I think you framed it really well, at the beginning of what you're trying to do and what the effect of this is on the business, because ultimately the bottom line is, does it bring value to the business? So how you get there, there's lots of variations. And I think, the term and the idea of design sprint is fairly new, and we'll continue to see it evolving. And, we just love to hear your story of how you've done it remote. So
yeah, I mean, that's the number one thing that differentiates us probably from Google Ventures, is the whole remote aspect. So actually the thinking behind it is the same, but the process, the way we work across different time zones and the way we use our online tools, that's where everything changes, right? And that's going to affect our teamwork.
Yeah, totally. In fact, we had about 2 or 3 different questions around time zones. Can you, double click on that topic and maybe give us a little more insight in how do you deal with that time zone challenge?
How do we deal with it? Well, one thing that we've tried to do is, at least if there's a team who's working on a sprint, so say there's 3 people in very different times. I'm not talking about a 1 or 2 hour difference. I'm talking about maybe one person is in Europe, like I'll be in London, and 2 of my teammates will be in Southeast Asia. So there's easily a 7-8 hour difference there. We will always try to have a time of the day where we overlap for at least 2 to 3 hours, if not more. Then it's also up to them. Like some of them might be more comfortable working late at night rather than morning. So that suits me fine, because that means they'll be online longer with me. But as long as we can cover those 2-3 hours overlapping, that means that we can do a check-in between ourselves. They can update me on what they've done. I can ask them questions, and we can also pair. We do a lot of pairing. So Mural is also great for that, because you can see people's, like on Google Docs also, you can see people's cursors moving along. So we'll pair. We might share screens with Screen Hero sometimes. Really depends what we're doing. But we also use, with different time zones, say that somebody's connection is down or anything like that, we also use another tool that we call PPP, which stands for Progress, Plans, and Problems, or Plans, Progress, Problems. And what this is, it's a GDoc. It usually should be 1 page long, not longer, that we share internally within the team, but we also share it with the client every single day. So everybody on the team fills in what they've achieved so far, what they're going to achieve tomorrow, and any problems that they're encountering, so that then they can kind of tag the client in it and say, hey, I need some help on this. And so when I come online, for example, much later than the other people, maybe even if they've gone offline or they're having a lunch break when I come online, I can just open the PPP report and see, okay, this is what John's done, this is what Sergey has done, or whoever, and this is what they're going to do. And then I can kind of take it on from there. Or at least if our tasks are not connected, I know what they're doing, and I'm just kept in the loop. So this is basically how we work around it.
Great. Thanks so much. And since you mentioned, working with clients, I have a bunch of questions here around clients. For instance, Chris writes, I'm concerned that my clients will not be able to use such tools as Mural and Slack because they're using technology in a regulated environment.
Mm-hmm.
I had another question around, presenting that mural that you showed to a client as well in terms of being a quote unquote acceptable deliverable. So, just thinking about like those two things, but anything else you want to talk about is, how do you engage with clients? How do you get them over the hurdle in the tools? How, presenting with them, working with it, what's different, and how do you guys deal with that in a remote context?
Well, first, I'd like to point out that, for example, it really depends on who you work with, and Chris, if I'm correct, is totally right. If we're working with startups, generally we don't have any kind of problems regarding tools because they're very progressive and they're using a lot of tools that we're using anyway. So they're familiar with Slack, they're familiar sometimes with Mural, they're familiar with design thinking. There's like a lot of things that they already are using, and teams are also smaller, and it's not so bureaucratic and everything. But when we work with some corporates, it has happened in the past that all of a sudden we realize that they can't use Google Drive. That's been a problem before. So I think I wasn't in that particular sprint, for example, but we just had to adapt and use the tools that they were using, and whether that was some kind of Microsoft Office something, or whatever it was that they use, if they couldn't use Skype and had to do phone calls, and we will adapt, but we will try to push as much as possible. We'll try to push those clients to make them work with us. And with regards to a mural not being a deliverable, of course, it's not a tangible deliverable, but it's not like this is it, it's just a mural. I mean, there was a whole lot of research that we did for them. We also had all the video interviews. We had recorded them, of course, with the permission of the users. We had transcribed the interviews. We had pulled out a lot of insights and collected all of those on Murals and on GDocs so that the client we were working for could continue to use them to improve the onboarding process. It's not like we came up with a final onboarding process, but we helped them use tools and processes that they hadn't thought about ever before. And we also taught them how to basically interview users, which they kind of knew how to do already. They were doing a pretty good job at it, but they improved their technique a lot more by pairing with us during the user interviews. And I think that's something that you deliver as well, and it shouldn't be underestimated that actually clients can learn a lot from you in the way that you work, as well as the things that you're going to deliver and the insights that you're going to share with them.
Do you find clients willing to do that? Because I get that question a lot. Is Mural's a great tool, or Asana is a great tool. Any of these tools that we mentioned, Slack's a great tool, but I can't convince my client to use them. Do you ever have that kind of resistance to using the tools, and how do you overcome that?
Well, there might be an initial resistance, but one thing that has helped a lot is, so for example, at Hanno, when I mentioned that we're transparent, we really share everything we do with the design community and with our clients, and basically anybody who finds our website will find all our information is there. So we have a thing called the playbook, and the playbook describes step by step how we work, how we do it, what we've done. Then we have the case studies to prove that this works. And I think that is also a very important thing to have when you're pitching to clients, or trying, not even pitching, when you've gone beyond the pitching and they want to work with you. But if they want to work with us, they also have to know how we work, and we always show them this at the beginning. And if they're totally uncomfortable, then we're not the right fit. Then we probably shouldn't work together, because this isn't going to work out well. And yeah, some clients have been very hesitant to start using these tools, and they might sometimes be like, oh, we don't know how to use this, it's going to take too long to learn, we don't use Asana. I mean, we never onboard them on Asana, for example, because one thing that we're very aware of is we don't want to overwhelm clients with too many tools. It can, even when I joined Hanno, I was just really impressed and a little bit scared by all the tools that were there. I said, I'll never know how to use all of these at the same time. But then you realize that you always use the same 3 or 4 tools, and then there's some others that you just maybe use once a week or once every 2 weeks. So yeah, when clients are not very convinced, we just show them what we've done before. We show them our playbook. We even do little tests. You know, we do a pre-sprint call where we say, okay, we're all going to join Slack today. We're going to show you how it works. We're going to show you why it works. We don't necessarily dig up data like statistics which say, well, Slack shows that 70% of people who use it are happier or something like that. I mean, it would also be possible to do that, but we don't even do that, because eventually they just realize that if they want to work in a new and innovative way, then the way we're working, actually, that's one way of doing something different. But then you have to go different, like kind of all the way.
Great. Thanks for that. I think that leads into another group of questions around Hanno as a company. And there were a couple questions around finding people to join your team or freelancers. And, you know, how do you recruit people with this mindset that you laid out?
Right. Well, so far, actually, it's really interesting that with Hanno, although we do receive a lot of applications and people who would like to work with us, most of the people who have been recruited have been recruited in a very kind of organic way. So it kind of happened that, well, there was a founder, there was John, then he and Sergey were working on something together remotely, and Sergey was like freelancing, and then eventually became like a full-time team member, and little by little people started being added to the team in that way. So it's always, for example, they met somebody else in a co-working space and they were just communicating with him all the time, and eventually he kind of joined the team as well. It doesn't mean that we don't get people who apply, but the same with me. I contacted them not for a job, but because I wanted to interview them for my thesis. And then I asked them, oh, can I observe you for a while, maybe like a week or two? And then 2 weeks turned into a month. And then after a month, I said, well, I might as well do an internship here. What do you guys think? And they're like, yeah, okay. So I guess at Hanno, many times what happens is we look for people who have obviously the similar mindset as ours, but also people who kind of have the same culture and the same values. And it's not so much about your technical capabilities, although we've seen some people who have amazing CVs, but it's also about how you express yourself and how does your mind work. That's what we actually want to see. And one of the things that we really like looking at is, does this person have an online presence in terms of, do they have a blog? Do they write on Medium? And just by reading how they write, we understand a lot more about how this person thinks and whether this person would be a good fit for the team, rather than looking at their portfolio and all their skills on LinkedIn. This is interesting, but it's not the main thing we want to see. But also, I'd like to point out, we are a small team, and as much as we'd love to work with more people, the reason we haven't been able to grow so much and so fast is also because it hasn't been sustainable for us to hire new people all the time. So we're maybe going to grow, but we're going to just take it easy and see, depending on the projects that we get, whether we can maybe collaborate with freelancers for one project rather than hiring more people full-time at the current stage.
Great. I think that leads to another question that we got around kind of more the human side of things. And the question is, how do you build up human relationships with your teams remote? Do you have any emotional barrier to working remote?
Yeah, this is a very important question. And I think a lot of it is based on the company culture. So again, I'll use myself as an example. When I joined, I realized that there was an amazing culture going on in this team, even though they were remote. And I don't think remote should be a barrier, but it definitely makes it more challenging. And I think one of the great things that Hanno has is that the fact, first of all, that we're remote, the reason why we're remote is because we want people to live the life that they think is best for them. So that already says a lot about how we how human we can be with each other, because we realize that, hey, not everybody wants to be in the same place, and not everybody has the same needs and desires. And then again, because we're very transparent, we're very open with each other, we basically communicate a lot all the time. So we have things like once a month we'll have like a long 1 hour call with somebody on the team who's going to coach us and ask us how we feel about things, both in our professional life and our personal life. Of course, we're not obliged to say everything, but we can say as much as we want, and we're not going to be judged. Then we have weekly buddy calls with other people on the team, who might be like 15-minute calls sharing how we feel. And we can even write like long posts, for example, on Basecamp, or just even on Slack, and say, hey, I want to communicate something to the team. So just having this space available where you know that you can be open, and you know you can even make yourself a bit vulnerable, that creates a great bonding in itself. And then, like I said, if we pick people who are kind of similar to us in mindset, or in terms of values, we also find out that although we all have different personalities, we can bond over the same things, because we have similar values, or sometimes similar interests, or sometimes similar sense of humor. And on Slack, of course we communicate about work mainly, but we also have a lot of fun. And I'll catch myself laughing out loud at something that's happened on Slack, and people say, that it possibly can't be fun to work with a remote team, but I think this is one of the most fun teams I've ever worked with, because of their personalities and how they've been able to show that online. And another major thing that is important to keep this bond alive is that we meet twice a year, all in the same place. So we do team trips, and I think any remote company, like Buffer and other companies, they meet at least once a year. And this is a team trip where we will work together for a week, but we'll also bond over social activities. We'll go out together. We'll maybe go visit a specific place together, kind of like a little mini holiday. And we have to make time for that as well. These are weeks where we don't work on any client project, and we just focus on us, and we'll tackle things about our culture and our goals and where we want to go as a team.
Nice. That's fantastic. So, we talked about working as a team, Hanno, and the team, and we talked about working with clients. And we have a couple of questions around working with customers. And one is around remote usability testing. And I think you had a slide in there about some user testing. But there's another question from Lou about, co-creating with customers using those tools. So I just wanted to talk about, remote work and, the tools that you use for remote work, looping in customers, whether it's testing or having a co-creation session with them, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, ideally what we like to have is a product owner on the client side who can commit, if possible, the whole week for us, but if they can't, at least maybe even an hour or two a day, or even just an hour. But so for the stand-up calls that I mentioned earlier that we have every I was going to say every morning, but it depends if you're in Asia, maybe it's in the evening. But for the daily stand-up calls, that's when we tell the client what we're working on. So that's one way of keeping them in the loop. And then when it comes to co-creating, we'll tell them a bit in advance, or if they're available on Slack, because we've onboarded them on Slack, we'll ask them, hey, will you be available in maybe an hour or two? We're going to do this exercise, and it'll be great if you could take part. And often they want to, because they're going to have a say in the result, which is great for them. It's a win. And they're going to learn how we use these tools so that they can continue using the same tools with their teams later on. So we've actually co-created a lot. It can come during brainstorming sessions, although often some clients don't want to do the brainstorming with us because they think that they want they're too involved in the actual product to take enough distance from it. So they'd rather leave the brainstorming to us, so that we can come with a totally different perspective on it. But then when it comes to other exercises, they will join. And they also, like I said before, some of them have joined for even like 3-4 hours at a time to do user testing with me. And then maybe I'll start the user testing. They come online because they're in a different time zone, like later on. And then they'll do it with me for an hour or two, and then they'll continue by themselves. And then they'll also update me in a GDoc or on Slack of what they've done. So by using these different tools, like Slack is just great. I mean, Slack, you just put everyone on the client side who can take part and get involved in the sprint, you just add them on Slack, and then you can just ping them whenever you need them. And you tell them in advance, look, try to be available as much as possible. How much time can you dedicate per day or per sprint? And then they'll tell you. So maybe they can only do 8 hours during the whole sprint, and then you can try to allocate those hours to the days that you think is best. So this is how we do it. It's an ongoing conversation. It's also very, as I said before, we're quite agile. So it's all about being organic and going with the flow as well. I mean, we don't have a specific schedule that we have to absolutely stick to. We try to make a daily schedule and stick to that. But if we have to make changes, then we make changes. And when we make that schedule, that's where we can see, okay, this is when we need the client. This is when we do not need the client. Or here we'll need the client only for feedback. So then you can ping them on Slack, or you can assign them a task on the PPP report. So this plans, progress, problems report that we do on GDoc. You can tag them there in a comment and say, hey, I need help with this. And they will come back to us either in a GDoc or on Slack. And I know it sounds a bit like there's information everywhere. And yes, that's true. There's information on GDocs and there's information on Slack, and sometimes there's comments on Mural. But because you're notified each time, then you can instantly go to that thing and then act on that feedback, basically. And it works.
Nice. Just to be, and maybe you mentioned this, so correct me if you did, but Mark asks if you've ever used Mural specifically as an effective collaboration tool with end users. Have you ever invited end users to a Mural to collaborate with them?
Not yet. I think not yet. Although that would be a really good idea. So thank you, Mark. Well, we haven't used Mural, but we've used, I think also, I mean, we're lucky we have a plan with Mural where we have unlimited amount of invitations that we can send out for people to use. But I can imagine that maybe some teams who have different plans, they have to choose wisely who they want. Otherwise, their rooms or murals will be full. So, but that hasn't been a problem with us. I guess we just didn't need that because we've done prototypes on different mobile prototype software things. We've done stuff on Google Slides, and then they've interacted with that, but we never give them like full editing power. We basically share a link where they can only view what we've done as a prototype, but we don't want them to edit. Then depending on what it is, they could comment, but it's just, we try to do a lot of testing with a lot of users, and maybe it would be just way too confusing and take up way too much of their time. We basically want to use only like 15, 20 minutes of their time sometimes. And some people are just not familiar with all these tools. And then if you have to start teaching them, or just, some people are just really not very technology oriented when it comes to some types of users, or just not familiar with what the cloud is, for example. And then it can just be, it's just not necessary, I think, so far. But it's something I'll take into consideration for the future.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I just wanted to also say that Mural is introducing the notion of a guest account as well, too, so that you will have the ability to have people with limited, capabilities within Mural to just kind of be a guest and not a full user to occupy that seat. So,
great.
Yeah, we recognize that situation that you just described, and we're trying to provide solutions in service that address that directly. I had one more thought, and there were a couple of questions around sketching. And, you talked about meeting face-to-face, and I presume there is some offline or, kind of sketching or, work that you do with physical artifacts. Can you just describe how you do that? Because I know we did a survey on remote design, and a lot of designers said when they're working remotely, they miss sketching. So I just wanted you to kind of react to that and see if you could have any cool solutions you could share with anybody.
Okay. So, well, I guess maybe some designers now will be cringing at what I'm going to say, but I guess we do sketch less than your average design team. I mean, this is, this is due also to the skills and the things that what people do on the team. So we have a lot of front end developers, so they design immediately. We design directly in the browser. When you think of a sprint also, you have to keep in mind that sprints are extremely short. Their time is extremely limited. So this isn't enough to go into huge amount of sketching, but the way that our developers work, they start immediately using the browser or the app or whatever it is that they're doing. They're designing directly in it. But we do have also a visual designer who's very talented at illustrating, for example, and he will sketch loads. And what he will do then, he'll either scan or usually take a picture of what he sketched, and then he'll drop that either, usually it's in a Mural, but it could also be in a GDoc. Or even in Slack, if he just wants to quickly express an idea. And I've done it as well. I have sketched. I just don't sketch as much as I used to. Also because I'm doing more research now than what I used to do in the past. But if we sketch, we can instantly take a picture of it with our phone and upload it on Slack, or drag it and drop it into Mural, and then people can start commenting around that. But yeah, I guess the way we often build prototypes is, let's just go directly into the actual prototype that we're going to share, and the sketches will be very minimal.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks for that. One more topic. I had a whole bunch of questions around tools, and we've mentioned Slack many times now, Mural of course too, and Google Docs, and that seems to be your stack that you use for remote work.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to just kind of touch on the relationship of tools and what you can do, what they allow you to do to your behaviors, and how much is kind of mediated through tools. And if you could just maybe deepen some of the specific things that you're doing with the tools that you use.
So all the tools.
Yeah.
I mean, not all, because that would take forever to explain.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay.
So the main ones that I mentioned before. Okay, I'll take Slack for example. I'm just going to try to think also in a chronological order. And this may be different for my teammates, I'm just speaking for myself. When I come online, the first thing I'll do is turn on Slack. We have different channels in Slack that we use for different purposes. So some channels, by the way, our Hanno Slack, we don't share it with clients. It's only for Hanno team members. Mm-hmm. When we want to create a Slack for a client or use Slack with a client, we create a new Slack team each time. So, and then when we're not using them anymore, we just sign out of them. But the Hanno one is the one I will log in every morning. We have a checking in and checking out channel, for example. So I'll check in just to say, hi, I'm online now. And maybe you can say something nice because it's the morning and you want to just greet your teammates with something nice. Then we have like a channel to talk about finances. We have a channel to talk about what we call it the water cooler channel, which is basically everything and nothing, which is like nothing very serious. And then we'll have channels to talk about our clients, but internally. And we'll also have, we've also integrated it with like our social media stuff. So we have like Twitter is, our Twitter account is integrated with our Slack. So basically anytime somebody mentions us in a tweet, it will appear in that social media channel that we've created in Slack. And we have also, like, for example, a form that clients have to fill in when we need their details to invoice them. We've integrated that with Slack. So that's what's cool, is that we don't have to check our emails. It's directly in Slack. We're notified about, hey, this invoice has been paid, or this person has signed a contract, or somebody has tweeted you. So it's just knowing how to use Slack to the utmost advantage. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, there was a lot of questions around the no email comment that you made. So, yeah. Which you just did again, saying that you're kind of weaning off email altogether. And, I think a lot of people on the call right now have, inboxes that are exploding, and they probably can't imagine working without email. So that's kind of new for folks too.
Yeah, I want to tell you that it's possible to not work entirely without email, but at least work, change the way that you communicate with at least your team. and also with clients. But obviously, when people reach out to you the first time, it'll either be on Twitter or by email. So yeah, I talked a lot about Slack, and of course you can also send direct messages to people, but we try to keep it all out in the open. Asana is what we use for anything that is project related, and we create, so this is where Asana replaces email basically, because we'll have like a task that we can assign to somebody else or that we assign to ourselves, and then you can assign followers. So it's basically like having people in a CC in an email, just that instead of being CC, they're being added as followers in a task. And in that task, you can constantly write messages about that task or about that project or whatever that task says. And those messages will be like a thread that you can read through. So say that I, for example, have a task for myself that I have to find like a new co-working space in London. And I need 2 other people to follow it because one person is in charge of like receiving the invoice or whatever. The other person is also maybe going to come to this co-working space. So I just communicate anything that has to do with this topic, which is a co-working space, into that task. And then everybody else who's following it can comment, they can like, sometimes they don't even have to comment, they can just heart my message previously. I can add attachments to it, I can add pictures, I can add Gdocs, I can add whatever I want. And then once I'm done with that task, once I've achieved what I wanted to achieve, I just check mark it, it's archived, and then nobody, I can search for it again if I have to, but that's it. That's basically, it's out of the way, it's done. And you can always find it in the archive if you search for it. And it's very easy to search for things. And we've created like templates there as well for each project that we do. We duplicate a template, and this template has all the things that we have to do to set up a project, to do the project, and to finish the project. And we'll just use that all the time. And then whoever is on the team of that particular project will take care of all those tasks basically.
Nice. Hey, thanks so much for everything that you've shared with us today, Lila.
Yeah.
We really appreciate your time. I see we're actually over the scheduled time, and folks probably have to get going. I have more questions here that we didn't even get to. So people super engaged and really interested in this topic. We will make the recording of the webinar available on our blog along with Lila's slides. I'll have some of the resources there as links as well. We're going to be continuing these webinars with here at Mural. We hope to have some coming up soon, so please stay tuned and we'll announce some more webinars. But I'd like to again thank you, Lila. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks to everyone else. Thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. So with this, we'll end the webinar. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.